This video is to be used after you have finished reading Chapter 1 of the novel The Great Gatsby. These notes are suitable for high school students of English. Please have your copy of the novel with you, your notebook, and pens and highlighters. If you are able to answer this quick quiz after reading Chapter 1, then you at least understood the major events of the chapter. If not, you will have by the time that you are done with this presentation. Are you ready? Please jot down the answers in your notebooks. Question 1. What advice does Nick's father give him? 2. Who lives in East Egg and who lives in West Egg? 3. Where does Nick go during this chapter? 4. Tom is reading a book. What is it about? Number 5. Who telephones during dinner? Number 6. What does Daisy say is the best thing a girl can be in this world? And finally, number 7. Who does Nick see at the very end of this chapter? Quick answers. You do not need to write in full sentences, but let's see if you got everything right. We are working towards the final assessment, which will be a full literary essay. You will need to refer to the text in detail, embedding appropriate quotations into that essay. Let's look at the language from the first 4 paragraphs of the novel. Nick starts this novel with a statement. He says, "I'm inclined to reserve all judgments." But is he? Look at the rest of the passage. Nick continually makes statements in which he shows his bias. Read what I have highlighted in green. Nick refers to some people as veteran bores, abnormal minds, and others as wild, unknown men. He refers in disparaging terms to politicians. He admits that he has feigned sleep or pretended to be asleep when someone has bored him. He admits to being snobbish, and he believes that fundamental decencies were parceled out unequally at birth. What does all of this tell us about Nick? And what does this tell us about what is to come in this narrated story? Another important quotation is this: "Conduct may be founded on the hard rock or the wet marshes, but after a certain point, I don't care what it's founded on." Hard rocks and wet marshes, those are 2 things you can't use as a foundation. Throughout the book, and here too, the author, Fitzgerald, uses contradictory words and phrases. Now here's a reading or analysis trick for you. Always pay close attention to the last lines of a chapter or scene. Authors often place a big idea at the end of a chapter or scene. This section ends with, "What foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men." For me, this evokes Shakespeare. And remember that Fitzgerald would have been classically schooled in the Bible, Shakespeare, and Greek and Roman mythology. This quote comes from Hamlet. "Why, it appeareth no other thing to me than a foul and pestilent congregation of vapours. What a piece of work is man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving how express and admirable, in action how like an angel, in apprehension how like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. And yet, to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights not me, no, nor woman neither, though by your smiling you seem to say so. Do you hear this echo in the words of Francis Scott Fitzgerald? These 4 paragraphs that we looked at in the previous slides make up a kind of introductory paragraph for the novel. But if that's true, then shouldn't it have a thesis statement, an opening statement that presents the argument that will follow? Which of these do you think could be the thesis, and why? Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. The intimate revelations of young men, or at least the terms in which they express them, are usually plagiaristic and marred by obvious suppressions. Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. I wanted the world to be in uniform and at a sort of moral attention forever. I wanted no more riotous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. It is important to note that Nick is telling this story from the future. The events in the East with Gatsby have already occurred, and we are hearing about it all after the fact. Most importantly, we need to remember that Nick is the narrator. He tells the story as a flashback, and he's not reliable. It's interesting that in the Baz Luhrmann filmed version of the novel, the movie starts with Nick in a psychiatric hospital, and Luhrmann has Nick typing the events of the novel as a form of therapy, a way to deal with everything that has happened to him. This is not what Fitzgerald wrote, but it is a fascinating and believable interpretation of the narrator's style. The setting of any novel is important. In Gatsby, it feels even more so than usual. Nick tells us, "It was a matter of chance that I should have rented a house in one of the strangest communities in North America. It was on that slender, riotous island which extends itself due east of New York, and where there are, among other natural curiosities, 2 unusual formations of land." The setting is New York, with much of the action taking place on 2 pieces of land that jut out into Long Island Sound. Fitzgerald points out that apart from their shape, there is nothing similar about these 2 places. If you draw the above paragraph as Fitzgerald describes it, you would probably end up with something like this picture here. What is that? Why would Fitzgerald do this? What does he want us to know about this place? With more detail, you could get something like this. 2 formations of land, separated by water. On the west side is one main house owned by Gatsby, and on the other side, in the east, another house with a green light on the end of the dock. It's not a stretch to see this morph into a pair of spectacles, is it? On a proper map, you should see this: West Egg, East Egg, And then there are other places which we'll get to know. The Valley of Ashes, the Wilsons' garage, and Myrtle Wilson's apartment in New York. Actually, it's Tom Buchanan's apartment, but that's where he rendezvous with Myrtle. Some Gatsby trivia for you. When Fitzgerald wrote this book, he was insistent that the title should be Trimalchio in West Egg. Thank goodness his editor persuaded him to call it The Great Gatsby instead. These are real homes, the inspiration for Gatsby's mansion. It's big, it's flashy, and that's the whole point. Gatsby wants everyone to know that he is here. He is not subtle. This is thought to be Tom and Daisy's house in East Egg, and this house has since been demolished. It's not as ostentatious as Gatsby's, but make no mistake, these people are rich. In one of the film versions, this is the house that was used as the Buchanan home. This map is from eNotes. It's no accident that Gatsby put his mansion across the bay from Daisy. Spoiler alert, Gatsby and Daisy were in love 5 years earlier, and all of this, the money, the parties, the house, are for Daisy. Is Gatsby a stalker, romantic, obsessive, compulsive? Yes, to all of those. And something else to think about. The green light that is at the end of the jetty of the Buchanan property. Could there be any connection with the Statue of Liberty, which is itself a shade of green? That's something for you to think about as we continue with our study of the novel. Are East Egg and West Egg all that different? Why does Nick live in West Egg? He's rich. Daisy is his cousin. He went to Yale with Tom. Why has he been positioned with the nouveau riche? In the United States, there's quite a societal division between the West and East coasts of America. You might be familiar with the long-standing feuds in the music industry between the West and East coasts. The West Coast is the new money, representing those who found their fortunes by taking risks, going after the gold that was discovered there. It's the world of Hollywood and ostentatious lifestyles. Daisy and Tom are not from this world. They have inherited their wealth. They didn't earn it themselves. They do things because it's the right thing to do, what they think is expected of them. They don't want people to look down on them. In the East-West divide, think East Coast, this is the world where the first European colonizers landed, where they try to recreate their European homes and towns and education systems, even naming their cities for their homes in England. Have you ever wondered why the city is called New York? Well, because it was the new version of the British city of York. Not very original, I know. We need to get to know the characters. You should create one page for each character in your notebook. You should already have started your notes on the narrator, Nick Carraway. Now we're going to have a look at Tom Buchanan. A reading tip. Pay special attention to the first time a character is introduced. An author takes great care in deciding how and when to bring a character about. It makes sense that this would be a place to find good evidence for analysis. Tom Buchanan is Gatsby's nemesis. As far as Gatsby is concerned, Daisy, Tom's wife and next cousin, left him for Tom. Fitzgerald needs his readers to dislike Tom. Look at the diction for Tom, especially what I have highlighted here in blue. Tom is sturdy. He has a hard mouth, a supercilious manner. His eyes are arrogant, and it always appears as though he is leaning aggressively forward. Tom's bulk is emphasized. He couldn't hide the enormous power of that body. His shoulder blade is under a great pack of muscle. It's a cruel body. In short, Tom is a jerk. Rather don't use that word as a description in your essays. Later in this chapter, he will be even more of a jerk, and in chapter 2, Scott Fitzgerald is going to make us hate Tom. And he does this because he wants the reader to be part of Team Gatsby. And when Gatsby and Daisy reunite, Fitzgerald needs us to set aside our moral code about married women. But if we hate Tom and feel sorry for Daisy, well, then we can root for the couple. Only later to have the author pull this out from under our feet. There will be no "and they lived happily ever after" at the end of this book. Incidentally, Tom Buchanan was based on a real person, so much so that Fitzgerald's editor, Max Perkins, thought that Tom should be the main character in the novel, not Gatsby. Fitzgerald, we believe, based Tom on William Mitchell, a millionaire football and polo player from Chicago who attended Yale University and married Ginevra King, a woman whom Fitzgerald himself had pursued. Setting and character are important. Look at the movement of these two paragraphs highlighted in lavender, the description of the breeze blowing the curtains into the room. What's the point of these two paragraphs anyway? Why is the author using two whole paragraphs to describe curtains? Why not just describe it in one sentence and get it over with? Well, besides the fact that the language construction is beautiful and perfect, Fitzgerald is telling us something more about Tom. How does Tom affect Daisy? She's in the fluttering white dress. Remember, and I will be blunt here, Tom is rich. Tom is married to Daisy. Tom's a villain. We hate Tom. Tom sucks. Tom's a racist. Tom is a brute. And if Fitzgerald is to be believed, Tom is more of a man than Gatsby or Nick. Bearing that in mind, I'm sure that your sympathies for Tom's wife Daisy are growing, especially when she is associated with the virginal, pure innocence of the color white. In your notebook, you should now start a page for Daisy. Jot down sentences that describe her, or page references where these descriptions can be found. We also need to look at the other woman in the lounge lying on the chaise lounge beneath the fluttering curtains. This woman is Jordan Baker. Nick's descriptions of Jordan are odd. What's odd about the words he uses to describe her? That her face is both charming and discontented? And why is she completely motionless? And did you pick up that Jordan knows Gatsby? That she knows about Tom's mistress? It's clear that she's a gossip and a socialite. It would be tempting to go into a whole feminist reading of Gatsby and just how awfully Fitzgerald treats his female characters. But we should probably leave that for those of you who are going on to tackle literature and gender studies at university. Remember, Jordan isn't a major character. She's static. She has a role to play, but we don't need to care about her as a person. She's ornamental. Right, let's go back to Daisy Buchanan, Tom's wife. Daisy's middle name is Faye. Look up the meaning of the word, and we'll come back to it later. I'm paralyzed with happiness. What does this even mean? Is it a compliment? She's so happy to see Nick that she can't possibly move. She laughed, an absurd, charming little laugh. I've heard it said that Daisy's murmur was only to make people lean toward her, an irrelevant criticism that made it no less charming. What do these lines suggest about Daisy? What do you notice about the way she's described? Can you tell what Daisy looks like? Nick has just described Jordan and Tom, but not Daisy. She's supposed to be Gatsby's great love, a beauty that a man obsessed over for 5 years. Why is there no particular comment about her physical appearance? You should be familiar with the mythology surrounding sirens, those beautiful female creatures that used to lure sailors to their doom. Is Daisy a siren? There are enough arguments to support this interpretation. Fitzgerald never describes Daisy. He only describes her voice and her beauty. She will be Gatsby's downfall. You could even say that Daisy lures Gatsby across the water with a light. Right now, as readers, we should be enamored with Daisy. But by the end of this book, we will dislike her as much, if not more, than Tom. Critics have often wondered who was the inspiration for Daisy's character. His own wife Zelda, possibly, or Ginevra King, the beautiful daughter of a wealthy Chicago stockbroker. Ginevra was clearly out of his league, and the relationship ended. When she married William Mitchell, Fitzgerald pasted her photograph into his scrapbook, along with a handkerchief that had belonged to her. Fitzgerald once told his daughter that Ginevra was the first girl he had ever loved, and that he had faithfully avoided seeing her to keep the illusion of that perfect love intact. Once you've finished reading the novel, you'll remember this anecdote as these words echo on the pages of The Great Gatsby. When Daisy's toddler daughter makes a very brief appearance in the novel, we learn a lot about Daisy. Look at the highlighted words, especially where Daisy says that immediately after the birth of her daughter, she said, "I'm glad it's a girl, and I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool." Well, who is the beautiful little fool? Daisy? Nick? Gatsby? Tom? Maybe all of them at some point in the novel. In this moment, Fitzgerald is building our sympathy for Daisy. We have to feel sorry for her so that we'll root for her and Gatsby. But then Daisy is described as defiant, like Tom. Nick and Fitzgerald are warning us not to be too sympathetic towards Daisy by comparing her with Tom. This is one of the most famous quotes from the novel. Stop for a moment and listen to Georgia Smith's song, Beautiful Little Fools. You'll find it on YouTube. Georgia was inspired to write Beautiful Little Fools at the age of 16 after reading The Great Gatsby, and in particular a passage from the book in which Daisy expresses her hopes that her infant daughter would be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool. Georgia took issue with this statement, and so used the phrase to form the basis of her song, in which she laments the restrictions that society and established social constructs place upon women. The music video for the track, released on International Women's Day, draws upon the Gatsby aesthetic and sees 3 versions of Georgia from different walks of life crossing paths. I think it's time to get back to our narrator, Nick Carraway. You might think that this passage is about Daisy, but it reveals far more of the narrator, Nick Carraway. Look at the bits highlighted in lavender. At the end of his visit with Tom and Daisy, this is what Nick says about them. Look at all that judgy language. Is Nick reserving any judgments? Well, certainly not after his experiences in New York with Tom. Well, this is a book about Gatsby. But where is he? How come he doesn't have more of a prominent role in the first chapter? We won't meet Gatsby properly until chapter 3. Look at the words highlighted in green. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him, some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. And it was an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness such as I have never found in any other person, and which it is not likely I shall ever find again. What picture is Nick creating for us of this title character? And do we actually know anything factual about him? At the end of the first chapter, Nick sees Gatsby for himself for the first time. Notice that Gatsby is a figure, not a man. He's a symbol of something bigger than man. Notice that Gatsby's first action is to look up at the stars. He's a dreamer, a romantic. He's not like us. Notice that he comes from the shadows. Gatsby isn't pure, he comes from darkness. And Gatsby has a habit of vanishing. In almost every chapter, he disappears. Could this be foreshadowing of the ultimate disappearance, death? The iconic Gatsby used to be Robert Redford in the 1974 film version. Oh, that's him second from the left. And he remains my favorite film Gatsby. Most of you are familiar with this meme, Leonardo DiCaprio as Jay Gatsby. No matter which film version of the novel you prefer, You must always draw your evidence of character development from the written text and not from the movie versions. The green light is perhaps the most recognizable symbol in The Great Gatsby. We know this because it appears in the beginning and the end of the book. In fact, the two scenes mirror each other. At the beginning of the novel, Gatsby is reaching. At the end, it's us who are reaching. The green light is about hope for something better. The critic Maureen Corrigan, in her book about Gatsby entitled "And So We Read On," says that the green light isn't the important symbol. It's the reaching for the light that is important. It isn't about the dream itself, but the striving for the dream. An American colleague, Amy Goldman, shared her favorite explanation of how Gatsby feels about the green light at the end of Daisy's doc. You know when you're online, and so's your crush, and there's a little green dot next to his or her name, and you see the dot, and you know that they are there? Well, that's how Gatsby is with the green light. It reminds him that Daisy exists, and that makes him happy. I just love this explanation. This is said to be one of the most well-planned books ever written. You need to pay close attention not only to the plot, the setting, and the characters. You need to note the way the book is structured and how it is written. For example, the book contains only 9 chapters, which can be seen as 3 distinct acts. There are images, phrases, and scenes which are repeated so often. In chapter 1, Daisy asks, "Do you always watch for the longest day of the year and then miss it?" The longest chapter in the novel is chapter 7, when it's the hottest day of the year, and it can be argued that it's the climax of the novel. There are many symbols and motifs to watch out for in the novel. You already have a good idea of some of them after sorting through the many different book jackets in the pre-reading activity that you did. And here's a list of some of them, and maybe a few that you hadn't thought of while you were categorizing the covers. Remember those questions at the beginning of this lesson. Let's check your answers. The advice given to Nick by his father is, whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, remember that not everyone has had the same advantages that you've had. In East Egg, you'll find Tom and Daisy Buchanan, the old money. In West Egg is J. Gatsby, the nouveau riche, and Nick Carraway. Nick visits his cousin Daisy and her husband Tom in their mansion on East Egg. The book that Tom is reading is called The Rise of the Colored Empires, and it's about the fears of white people losing their positions of privilege. During dinner, Tom's mistress phones him, and Tom leaves the table to take the call. Her name is Myrtle Wilson. Daisy cynically says that the best thing a girl can be is a fool. At the end of this chapter, Nick sees his next-door neighbor, J. Gatsby, standing and staring out at the green light on the other side of the water, the green light that shines at the end of the dock of Daisy's property. Much of the hard work for this slide presentation was done by an American high school English teacher, Amy Goldman, who has been so very generous in sharing her work with me and other teachers of this novel. Thank you, Amy, for your kindness, generosity, and inspiration. It is much appreciated.